Conservation District. And if you don't know very much about your conservation district, in your county, we work on soil, water, and wildlife stuff. And that comes in a lot of different forms. We had a forestry cost share, which is how we kind of got involved with doing more outreach on forestry stuff. The Lake County Conservation District is a special district in the county, so it's run by a board of 7 volunteers, and I'm the one employee. So we try and get a lot done, but there aren't very many of us. But Alan Brannin is on our board, and he's here to talk to you tonight about your home and your forest around it. A couple of the other things that the Lake County Conservation District does right now, like Paul was saying, we have that septic pumping cost share. So if you would like to get your septic system looked at or inspected and you'd like to get it pumped, we will pay up to half of the price of that. And we're looking to get some more money to help out with maybe some replacements. And we got this grant funding from the Flathead Basin Commission, and they did a study around the lake about the age of the septic systems and the risk of septic leachate into the lake. And it turns out that like 60% of the septic systems around the lake are 50 years plus, which is, I mean, not everyone is supposed to fail in 20 or 30 years, but they're supposed to work really well for 20 to 30 years, and then who knows. So there are a lot of important water quality things that we do. We've done this forestry stuff. If you hear about people giving out wildflower seeds, we're the ones that give out wildflower seeds in the spring. We have a pollinator habitat conservation program that we're really into. So we're really doing a lot of things, and one of them is outreach on forestry stuff and your home ignition zone. That's what Alan's here for. So Alan Brannin used to work for the state, and now he is retired, and he's a volunteer on our board. So if we could all give him a round of applause.
Good evening. It's good to see so many people that came out on a cool February day, even though it has been kind of nice the last couple of days. The beautiful sunset coming over here. I was glad it wasn't the snowstorm that we had when this was originally planned. I really didn't want to brave that storm at all. We've had a lot of, I'm from Swan Lake, Montana, and so we've had a lot of accidents over there. And our snow is about this deep right now, but it's melting. So, my background, I was the Swan Valley Fire Management Officer for the last 25 years, and I retired in 2020, that January 2020. So I was 25 years in the Swan, and I had 33 years with the DNRC and 8 years with the Forest Service. My best year with the Forest Service was working on a lookout tower up Lookout, and we had one lightning storm that came through, and I called in 19 fires, and of the 19 fires, 17 were initial attack, and only 2 kind of disappeared back into the woods. And so it just goes to show around Montana, you never know when this storm's going to hit, that lightning storm or some ignition source that may come up that you want to be ready for, because just like what happened at the end of the slideshow, I'll show you a few pictures of the Elmo fire that occurred last summer. But mainly we want to talk about your home and the defense that you can do around it, and a lot of it can just actually be maintenance. This first 5-foot zone, or actually let's just start with the roof. That maintenance normally for your roof is just a matter of getting your needles cleaned out, getting your gutters cleaned out, all the pine needles removed, and other debris. And then from the roof, if you don't have a good roof. I went to high school in Canada, so I have both pronunciations. If you don't have that protected, then there's no sense in working any further away from your house, because you have to start with your house and protect that first, and then gradually move away for your fuel mitigation efforts. And the ones closest to your house are most important. And so that you can see the 5-foot zone around the house is the next important zone where you really want to have all of that clear of any flammable vegetation. I know a lot of people have maybe larger, taller trees. The trunk of that tree may be within 5 or 10 foot, but as long as the needles above that are above your roof line, then if a fire does somehow jump up into that crown and burning debris comes out of that, it'll be above your roof line and your roof's protected. So then you may get sparks raining down, but it wouldn't cause your home to ignite. And as I go through this, I want to be interactive. Go ahead, stop me at any time and ask questions, because that way, when you ask questions, you can learn more from your specific circumstance that I may really not know about.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah.
I have a question. We started with the roof, and I know a lot of people here, I know we don't have a metal roof on our house. There are buildings on our property that do. Can you kind of give us an overview of like roof material and what?
Class A shingles are fine. The only thing we don't recommend is if you do have a cedar shake roof, and most of those, may not be around anymore. There is some new non-flammable material that you can treat your cedar shakes with. But all Class A shingles, metal roofs. I have a metal roof on my house, but what I found is that my roof cap doesn't have adequate screening, and embers can fly through the roof cap into the house and into the attic. And so that's a major thing that I really need to fix on my metal roof, and a shingle roof wouldn't do that as much. Shingle roofs are pretty well set. So in some circumstances, for ember wash, a metal roof may be worse than a shingle roof if you don't have that screen in your roof cap, and embers can get inside that and burn, starting from the inside out rather than from the outside in. So, but does anybody have any different type of roofs besides shingles or metal? Good questions, yeah. See, that's why I like to get some questions going, and that way we can answer them. So then we go 5 foot, no vegetation, and the important thing to look at there is find and plant flower gardens and other things around, the edge of your home. And a lot of people may use a wainscot at the bottom of their home that may be a non-flammable, either like rock work or even metal on the bottom, so that's non-flammable also. And that's really good to add to the bottom of your house. A lot of people have concrete foundations, but if the wood overlaps, or any time that you might have a pocket where embers can get in, and if that's all wood in there, or like this garage door here, any place an ember wash can get into where the wood is in these little corners and creaks or siding. That's another thing to watch out for, that you kind of want to make sure that's all clear and that you don't have any place the embers can get in. And that's why it's so important after a fire goes through, or ember wash, as soon as the firefighters can get back to that and visually check each structure. In 2000, when the Wedge Canyon fire burned, that burned up several homes, but because they were pre-staged right near the fire, they were able to get there and put out some logs that had caught. The sill logs were kind of rotten above the foundation, and so they were able to extinguish those. And then there was also a roof where, exactly on my house, the sparks got inside the roof line, and it started the whole interior main beam of the A-frame on fire. So it was really important to get back in there and check right after a fire. So, I think that does it for the 5-foot area. Any other questions about the no?
We have hardy plank on our house, and that's supposed to be like a cement type.
Yep, that hardy plank is great.
But we also have a wooden deck that's around our house, so what do you do then?
Okay, so for wooden decks, that's a good question. You want to try to screen in the bottom of those wooden decks so sparks can't get underneath it. Or if you do store a lot of things underneath it, you want to make sure that the sparks can't get in there. If you don't store things under your wooden deck, as long as it's just bare mineral soil, that's fine, because dirt won't burn. That's what we put fires out with, is dirt. And so the decks are fine as long as they're treated with good material and don't have a lot of different furniture. You may have to fold up your furniture or move it off or have a good way, if anything's flammable on your deck that would start a fire and smolder and then ignite and cause bigger flames that occur there on the side, on your deck. But decks are usually good. The sparks usually won't cause that deck to ignite unless there's rotten pockets or it gets caught in between and you have a lot, so it's a maintenance thing again for your decking. But clear underneath. If it's not clear underneath and you store things in it, go ahead and screen it in. And a fine metal screen is fine. So then we can go into your 30-foot zone, and this is where you want to have a nicely watered lawn. Or some people don't like watering their lawn all year, so I've seen a lot of rock work into landscape, especially any sloped areas. If you have a steep slope coming up to your house within this 30-foot zone, the steeper the slope, the faster a fire would move into the house. So that's where you want to make sure you mow your grass or put rocks or dirt or something like that on the sloped areas. And then you can start having little shrubs and trees and all that. The main thing, we just don't want to see a lot of juniper bushes that are highly flammable right next to your house. They can be out further in the yard. You can see there's a couple trees and all that out there. So that's the next zone, is that 30-foot zone. And most of the studies have seen that even you can have flames out to 30 foot, and they can be 10 to 15 foot, and the heat from that still won't generally ignite your home unless the sparks or embers or something like that get in there. And so that's why that 30-foot zone is really important. And then out to your 100-foot zone, you can start blending that back into the natural landscape, where you can have more, if you want to keep your privacy, keep your wood shed. The only thing with sheds that are, see, it says should be at least 30 foot from the home, but you'll see in the pictures of the Elmo fire, my friend's shed was about 500 foot from the home, and she left a slash pile next to it from clearing the forest, thinking we were clearing the forest, but then the slash pile was there and the slash pile was never burned. Well, it caused the whole shed to burn because of how fast that Elmo fire went through. Just like Boulder fire that went through. It's just so fast, and in the middle of the night it's just so scary to be there. The fire management officers from the tribe that have fought fire for 30, 40 years like I had said they'd never witnessed anything like that in their life. And one old mentor of mine, Wally Bennett, who was the type 1 IC I worked with for many years, he said, that's the interesting thing about fire. I may be 70 years old, but every year you see something different that you've never seen before. And that's what makes fire so interesting, is it kind of does its own thing, and every fuel complex causes that fire to burn differently. The fine fuels, if you have a lot of fine fuels and grass out here outside your 30-foot zone, and you let the grass get to over a foot or 2 foot high, that causes the fire to move through so much faster than if it was cut low, or if you had more of a forestry natural setting with like kinnick or shrubs like serviceberry, dozier, dogwood, you know, the different kinds of natural forests that grow in the woods here. That's what you want out here in this 100-foot zone.
I have a question. We have a number of ponderosa pines on our property, and they throw out a lot of needles every year, and we occasionally try and break those up, but there comes a point where it's like you can't even keep up. So how, because it'll start to create some depth there, and is that like a really bad scenario for fire if it gets into those needle beds like that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's amazing, especially in eastern Montana, where we have a lot more ponderosa, and on the west side of the lake where there's a lot more ponderosa. What I've seen and experienced, for each inch of needle mat that accumulated underneath a ponderosa pine, I could equate that to a 1-foot flame length. So by the time you have 6 inches of needles, because they're long needle pines, they create a lot of oxygen can come in with the heat, and next thing you know, you got 6-foot flame lengths from just 6 inches of needles. So it's pretty amazing how flammable that ponderosa pine is. Your shorter needle pines, like even though the bark on ponderosa is resistant to fire, the needles really create a lot of fire. So I was planting trees with a friend on the west side in Dayton, and we planted 300 trees last spring, and while we were doing it, it was in the spring, we had a rain shower come in, so it had big ponderosa, and I dug in there and it was a foot of needles. So I lit the whole thing on fire, and I got yelled at, "What are you doing, like my tree fire?" It's like, we're just doing a little fuel reduction. And that tree survived the Elmo fire when a lot of others did, because I burned all the needles out from under it.
Huh.
Oh, it was pretty interesting that just happened.
So you recommend then people rake up those ponderosa needles?
Yes, yeah, especially in your yard. Now, you know, once they get out to be out in the woods, out in this 200-foot zone, you know, that's just kind of natural habitat out there. You know, you're not going to get out there and rake your whole woods. Yeah, just forget about that. It's more the tree density out here, and we'll talk about tree density a little later with some mitigation. That, let's see. Whoop. So that's pretty much for the home itself. Any other questions about the home as we move out and see what you can actually do for the forest around it and the ladder fuels, what causes fire behavior to move?
Yeah, I got a quick question on this stuff in the building a defensibility zone around your home. Is there any services around that can come and look at your property and say, hey, you know, you really should take care of this, and you know, to make your home more survivable if there ever is a big fire here?
Yeah, and luckily we have one contractor right here with Wolf Ridge Mitigation and Land Management that can come out and do that. And then also for a private company, and they can recommend things. And then DNRC and through some of the local fire departments will come out and do a home evaluation for you. But Department of Natural Resources has service foresters and fire prevention aides, and they'll do a free service to evaluate your home and give you an actual home assessment. My last 10 years that I worked after 2000, and when the big fires of 2000, 2003, 2006 occurred, a lot of the insurance companies required homeowners to go out and have a home evaluation that when their home was in the Swan Valley, because it was such a high risk area, you know, and so Department of Natural Resources will do that. Carrie Cooley with Lake County Fire Association, she's starting a fuel mitigation program now, and she'll come out and do some home evaluations, and you walk around the home. I just love to go walk around homes and give everybody a checklist, and then they think, oh, I haven't done that in my house yet. So what causes fire and what's gonna happen for these crown fires that are going through is that the spacing of your fuels, fire needs three things to burn. It needs fuels, heat, and oxygen. That's the three legs of what we call the fire triangle: fuel, heat, and oxygen. And so there's plenty of oxygen out here, and once you get heat and ignition source, especially if you got a little slash pile like that you burn, that heat wants to go up. And so what happens when that fire burns and the heat goes up is it gets into aerial vegetation and it causes a crown fire. So the best way to fight a fire is to keep it on the ground, and that's where we can put fires out. Once fires get up into the tree crowns and start crowning, it's almost nearly impossible to stop a fire, especially if it's pushed by a wind, or an example with the Boulder 370 fire, that wind was a downdraft that caused that crown fire to just rip down the mountain and crown. And there, since it was in the middle of the night, a lot of it, you can't fly retardant droppers on it or anything like that. So ladder fuels, what you want to do is you want to cut this lower vegetation off here so that any spark on the ground doesn't have a chance to leap to the next height, to the next height, to the next height, and get up in the crowns. So by taking those layers out of flammable material, you're going to protect the crowns of your big ponderosa pines, Doug fir, western larch, whatever you may have in your yard. Okay? So this is a picture of, and I have to apologize, some of these slides that when we first built this for the Pop Talk weren't from this area, but this is pretty similar to this area here. And especially in the Swan and in around Swan Lake, the west shore of Swan Lake, it is so thick, just like this, of overgrown cedar trees that are 5,000 stems per acre. And for a contractor to go in, we were getting bids up to $10,000 an acre to thin that, because there's just so much ladder fuels and so many stems have to be taken out, mulch, piled and burned, or anything like that. And so this is a pre-picture here, and this is, they said, a Doug fir stand, and you can see it's definitely overcrowded because the lower limbs are all dead. And that means that no sunlight is getting down through the canopy, and so all your needles on the lower trees die, and that just adds to the nice dry kindling that you want to build your little campfire with if you were out there in the woods. So by taking out all that lower stuff, you can leave the nice tall trees and not have any ladder fuels going up into your crowns, and that also adds to the health and vigor of the forest. That's what a lot of people don't realize. Even they say each tree to live takes 16 gallons of water a month that it sucks up out of the soil to sustain itself. And that's kind of generalized. They vary between larch and Doug fir and ponderosa pine that can tolerate more drought.
So after a thinning like that, did brush come in?
Well, that's the thing, is that you still maintain the upper crowns, because if you thin it too much and all your crowns are too far apart, then all this additional sunlight, that's an excellent question, will come in and will change the microclimate on the forest floor and cause more fine grasses where it may cause the fire to move through faster, rather than keeping the natural forbs and brush and herbs that were on there. But in this country, as long as there's bear grass, elk sedge, you know, the real short grasses were in pretty good shape. On the west side of the lake, it's just, it's almost like going to eastern Montana from the east side here where we're sheltered from the sun to the west side. It's quite a bit different habitat, so. Yeah, you don't want to open it too much because it can change that microclimate. And that's why it's good also that if you got a specific spot around your property and there may be a depression and a little riparian area, wetland, so to say, spring, whatever, you can leave that dense pocket. You can leave that, if it's spruce or cedar or something, you may be able to just leave that pocket in there because it's going to be more than 200 foot, hopefully 100 foot away from your home. And if that's a special niche, especially for wildlife or animals, it doesn't hurt to have a variety out there. That, you know, wildfires don't burn homogeneous, they burn patchy. And so it's all right to actually do, and I like a variable thinning concept where you thin more in some areas and less in others, depending on that little microsite and ecosystem there. So that's really important too, I think. So here's some of the thinning that was done. I don't know if so see how much grass is there, or I mean, the ladder fuels, even though this is some weird kind of fuel type, I don't know what kind of trees those are. But you can see by removing that, there's no way a fire is going to get up in there. So let's talk about the types of machines that can do this, because I don't know how many, I just found out that, you know, you may have up to 5-10 acres or 1 or 2 acres, or maybe even more than that, 10 acres. Does anybody have a ownership here that's larger than 20 acres that goes up the hill with a lot of forest? No? Okay. Have you done any logging or thinning or? Yeah. Good. Because that'll depend on the type of equipment. You know, a lot of the equipment that is geared for large logging jobs, the big skidders and clippers and all that, aren't appropriate to be moving around your home and trying to thin trees because they'll just tear up your whole ground and soil. And so the timing of the equipment is good too, because if you start in the spring right after snow melt, that's breakup. That's when the soils has the highest moisture content, and that's when it can get compacted and it causes the most detriment to soils is wet soil. You want to work on it when it's either super dry or when it's frozen in the winter. Winter's a great time to thin. The only problem is we have a law in Montana that doesn't allow us to burn from November 30th to March 1st. So March 1st is the first day that you can burn again. If you want to do burning as part of your fuel mitigation effort, you'll have to do chipping or something like that. There's a really neat thing going on up in the Flathead, a new technology out there. They're doing a biochar demonstration where they put all this fuel in this, that after they come in with the clipper, they can grapple skid all that fuel into this biochar bin, and it burns it and it seals it, and it's allowed to burn in the winter, and it creates charcoal. And then that charcoal you can put back out and go ahead and it almost is like carbon sequestering too.
Who's doing that?
Biochar?
Yeah, who's locally is doing that?
It's an outfit up in the Flathead. If you look on the
Or just Google Flathead Biochar, I'll get it?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look it up here later for you to see exactly what
I
it
believe the
is.
information's on the NRC website.
Okay, yeah, it's on the university website. I was looking at the MLA website, but
Yeah.
a lot of you probably don't do the Montana Loggers Association website like I do. But it's a really neat thing that hopefully that those kind of new innovations will really help out homeowners, I think, and help pay for this type of fuel mitigation work. So track skidders are good because they're kind of low ground pressure. You want a low ground pressure equipment around your home. And if you just have a 4-wheel skidder that rather than the tracks, a lot of people, all you gotta do is push forward and back and that thing will go whoom, whoom. And depending on how fast the operator is working, he can dig holes up to a foot deep just by spinning that little 4-wheel skidster around. And so you want to be careful of that too. The slower machines, excavators, normally are all tracked and they can just move through and pick up stuff and put it in a pile really easy, especially if it's been hand thinned or something like that. And then there's masticators, where I think this is a masticator, and that's one of the things that Todd had as a masticator, and there's brochures here about that, right?
What's that?
The
Yes, yeah, we can pretty much do just about anything. I mean, when it comes to that, with a masticator head, we can come in, we can take it right down to bare dirt and soils, or we can lift the masticator head up and just trim it and leave, you know, stumps and grasses and however somebody chooses they want to do that property.
So that's a good thing to use as a masticator. And a lot of times, if you're doing a thinning job, that masticator will just rip through the pine needles and it just spreads them out, mixes them with dirt, and then they go back in the soil and decay a lot quicker. So that's one of the good things about a masticator. Get rid of your pine needles with that. So you can just see how much that thing can do. There's masticators that are boom mounted also on excavators, and they can come in and be a little more selective, especially if you have more aerial fuels rather than just ground fuels. So there's a masticator at work. Let's stand on this side for a while. And you can see how it just sprays the stuff out in front of it. I have seen some areas where they masticated at the wrong time of year, the soil was wet, they went down into the dirt, and 20 years later, there's still nothing growing on that. So you don't want and they've had problems. Then the only thing that's growing there now is dandelions. Dandelions and daisies, oxeye daisy.
That machine there is about 30,000 pounds. It's an FTX 200, and it's probably a little bit bigger than what you're going to use on most like 5-acre parcels.
Oh, okay.
So it's a fairly big machine. It's 200.
Yeah, it doesn't look that big here, but it's a big machine.
It is. I've spent a few hours on one. So this case here is mostly what you're going to use on like 5 acres or less.
Right, okay. And I guess it can just go right into a pile like that and masticate everything. Pretty much.
Depends on what kind of teeth it has on it.
Yeah.
A big pile like that is hard to get through because you'll get to the top of it, and it's nice to have like a gravel machine or an excavator to kind of sort the pile out, and then you can masticate it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because this is what I normally burn, piles like that. They burn well. Okay, there's the chipper, and if there's no merchantable material, you can go ahead and run it through a chipper, spread the chips out. If you have horse pass, or, you know, I'm surprised with all the cherry orchards here, if anybody uses wood chips in between the cherry trees. I thought that might be a good mulch to use if you ended up with a lot of chips or something that maybe wouldn't hurt the cherry orchard, but yet be some way to get rid of the chips rather than having them build up. And again, if you create more than a foot deep of chips, there's so much fuel out there, and this is another thing I found out on the west side of Swan Lake when that 5,000 stem per acre cedar is the chips got so deep, 20 years later, is still chips. They haven't decayed. There's a few trees, a few shrubs, a few forbs growing up through it, but you don't want too big a chip layer if you got so much fuel out there. So that's where you kind of got to decide if you want to chip, masticate, or spread it around. And then this is an Inwoods processor. And this is a really neat machine in that it can get the highest value for your timber, and that it'll cut the tree off, and it's got all kinds of electronics that measures every piece of wood that comes through that. It'll zing it up, zing it back, and it'll cut it off precisely at 16.6 or 24 or 32, whatever gets the most value for that piece of wood. And then they lay them in the woods, and then a forwarder comes in and it picks up that wood and will deck it on its bunk, so nothing's ever dragged on the ground. All the material is put up in the air, and even though these are big heavy machineries with 6 tires and tracks on the back, they're still a low ground pressure equipment. So that's another good thing. If you do have submersible timber out there, it may cost more for this type of logging equipment, but it utilizes more material and is better for the ground. It's a lot more sensitive, I guess. Chipping old tree logging. Okay, so that's the last of that. Any questions about logging or thinning or anything like that? Nope. So like I said at the beginning, when the Elmo fire started last summer, it came off of Highway 28, and it ripped through that. And this is sitting at Dayton at my sister's house in the dock. And that morning, this is what the fire looked like. And it was about 11 o'clock. Probably a lot of you saw it from this side of the lake. Yeah. But it still hadn't crested the ridge yet. And so this is just in one day's time period. I'm going to show you these different slides here of when it crested this ridge and then came down into what we call the wildland urban interface community there.
Tell me how that started again.
Well, that's still debatable. There's been reports of chains dragging, a tire catching on fire and rolling off the highway. Nobody really knows how it started yet. I haven't seen it. I'm with the Lake County Fire Association because I'm with the Swan Lake Fire Department, and we're still interested in what started that fire. It's undetermined so far. But they don't think it was arson like what happened over here. So this is a little later in the afternoon when this thing really started getting up. And so what happens with a fire is when you start seeing a column develop like this, then it moves from being a wind-driven fire into a plume-dominating fire. And it'll start sucking in all the air into the column, and the winds will increase, and that's when you start, and then once it came over the ridge, this is just 2 hours later, it topped that ridge and came down into the community, and you can see how it just was burning up then. So luckily, they had 4 super scoopers on the lake, and at this time, when it's coming over, they started out here and were running dozer lines up through here, and they're able to use the super scoopers along with the dozers and wet the edge of where they planned that fire line, trying to save as many homes as possible. And it went just 150 foot above, the dozer line's 150 foot above my friend's house, which was sitting right in the middle of this column right there. And saved the house, but then the upper outbuilding got burned from that. And this is just the first day. This is before it moved further west to Lake Mary Ronan. And then, you know, it was another big day of fire activity and went through that. So yeah, we don't want to see your sheds ending up like that, and that's where, you know, we have to have priorities and then ways to, I always look at risk, low, moderate, high risk, or extreme risk. And so you have to weigh the risk of what your property is and the trees that you value on it with how much work you want to do around your home and all that. It's all based on a risk basis. You know, I as a DNRC service forester, I get called a lot, well, should I take this tree down? And I say, I'm not gonna tell you whether you can take the tree down or not, but I'll bore it, I'll see if it's rotten, we'll see the type and species of tree it is, and then I can give you, this is a moderate risk, or a moderately high risk, or a low risk, and then you have to make that decision of whether or not you wanna take that tree out. Unfortunately, at the time when we're thinning out the small trees in the access way, we put all the slash piles next to her shed, and then the shed, it burned so hot that all the metal you can see just completely collapsed and almost melted. The boat and the car that were in there, the engine was just a puddle of aluminum on the ground, and all the fiberglass in the boat was gone, and the car was kind of, most of the metal's there, but the rest of the tires and wheels that were all aluminum magnesium are all puddles on the ground in there. That's going to be quite a cleanup this spring. Go ahead.
You know, because we, you know, most of us probably live somewhere along this East Lake Shore somewhere, and maybe others, but we have so much fire hazard forest here everywhere you look, and so as a person, we're trying to do stuff on our property, but then we're surrounded by people that aren't doing anything, either because they don't have the funds, or they don't have the, you know, the resources, manpower, or whatever, maybe just don't know they would be doing something. How do we raise, you know, I guess a greater attention to that in this community? I mean, this is helping obviously, but how do we get that out there more?
Well, I'm really hoping, because the grant program now has been taken over and we have a good state surplus budget, and the governor's already awarded an additional $3 million to fuel mitigation, and I have a feeling that there's going to be 5 to 10 million coming up here by the end of the legislative session. And Lake County Fire Association and Lake County OEM has put under their wing a fuel mitigation program for all people in Lake County, so that if you can afford it, you know, hopefully it's going to be a break-even property. And like I said, some people, we had one gal that's the wilderness ranger for the Mission Mountains for 25 years, and she had dead lodge pole all around her house, and she says, I don't care, this is where I live in a log home, I like all the dead trees piled up next to my home, I don't have anything in there personally that I want to keep, I'd rather live in the woods like that. And so that was her choice, to live in a high-risk home. So I don't think a lot of us want to lose all our belongings in our home, but she didn't care. That was the way she wanted to live. So we all have different risks that we want to take. And all you can do is do what you think is good around your place, because it is that 100-foot circle and your home itself that really makes the biggest difference. It won't be from the other person's property unless that ember wash gets the sparks in here.
Okay, so like you said, you know, we've done everything we can right around our home, but the neighbors who don't live here, they have trees that are hanging over, they're like hanging over the chicken house, hanging over my garage. And is there anyone that can call them and talk to them and try to convince them that their trees are a hazard? You know, because they're just not taking care of their trees, and they really are a hazard.
Yeah. And there's a law in Montana that requires you to reduce the hazardous fuels on your property. So there is a law, and Montana Code's annotated. It requires that you mitigate any hazardous fuels on your property. And that comes in, I can't remember the exact section it's in yet, I'd have to research it, I should have
Yeah,
looked up
because
that
I-
MCA code earlier, but
Yeah.
there is a law about that, and I called the DNRC folks, Kerry Cooley with Lake County Fuel Mitigation and local fire department, and try to put some pressure on them, especially your access roads. Your access roads, if they're blocking your access roads, or you don't have a 14-foot wide clear zone that you can drive safely to your home and back without trees and branches going over the top of your access road. That's another really important thing that has to be cleared, so that fire trucks or anything else like that, you can escape and you won't have that flame impingement, burn your car up when you're trying to leave. Yeah?
Can you address the fire mitigation program that is available, or is it available to us to free some costs to have our property looked at?
Yeah, well, it's just starting up now. I don't know, do they have any money yet?
I guess.
They don't have any project funding yet. They have targeted project funding, but we're working with the state to get a grant that has a little less targeted project funding. The Conservation District had a cost share with the state, or the money was run from the state, and we contracted with all the people that we had money for. And Paul and Denise and their parents were part of the people that got into the program. And so that's great, but there's, like Alan said, there's just a crazy amount of money coming down the line through both the tribe and the state. And there are going to be tons of opportunities to get funding. And Kerry Cooley, who we've mentioned many times, is now in charge of all of that.
So the OEM, Office of Emergency Management for Lake County, is who to contact, and keep your name on the list.
So we submitted an application last fall, would it still be on file?
Oh, good, yeah. Yeah,
I sent all the information that I had for any applications over to Kerry, but it wouldn't help to just do it again,
To the
just
OEM?
because.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, we can put her.
The Office of
phone number
Emergency
up here
Management.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can put her contact info.
Oh, good,
here.
you can do that, yeah.
Yeah,
Because I don't have her number.
yeah.
I live on the
I'll just put it up here real quick.
Swan Valley side, the kind of hidden big fuel area, Lake County. We have our own problems over there.
Part
Yes.
of it is that mistletoe stuff that's all over the place.
Oh, the mistletoe is the worst here on the seashore.
Oh, it's terrible.
The mistletoe on your Douglas fir, I just saw all these mistletoe trees out here, and you can see from when the Boulder 370 fire burned, that all those mistletoe trees, I think, really attributed to losing some of those homes that evening, that night. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
So, as Heidi mentioned, we have a project going on right now where we have a lot of trees thinned out on our property. It was very unhealthy, way too close, not much crown, mistletoe, and apparently pretty bad beetle infestation. Trees that are dead that don't know it yet. They still look a little green, but they're not healthy. So there's been a lot of trees taken off our property, and so there's also been a lot of discussion about blowdown and how you take a lot of trees out, and the wind comes through. We're getting more nor'easters these days coming down the mountain. Trees are now more vulnerable because they don't have their groups together that used to protect each other.
You don't even have to have the groups. I had 100 trees come
Yes.
down on my property.
You have a
2 years
Before you even then?
No, we were parked out.
Oh, okay.
We had 100 trees come down, and most of them were the ponderosas. And we had to have them, we couldn't get in and out.
Well, a couple of years ago, the whole biological station was,
Right.
that's when you had it too?
Well, mine was 2 years ago. That was
Okay.
long.
About 5 or years ago, yeah.
Mhm. So it doesn't matter if My neighbor clear cut his, except for right along the road, and the last windstorm we had, those went right over, so that's what you're talking about. They have no protection.
So